everyone to the Behavioural Investor, the final episode of Season 2, episode number 10. We have a very special guest today, very appropriate for the theme of the podcast. His name is David. Would you like to tell us what your profession is, the time where you are, and a bit of an update on COVID-19?
So I'm David Fanner. I work at Ogilvy Consulting Behavioral Science Practice as an analyst. Really, we do behaviour change. That is our main thing, but we apply it creatively. My time zone is currently 10 in the morning on Sunday, which is very different to you. You've already had your Sundays. And the COVID situation is actually quite cheery. Like I just went to grab a flat white, which I know is contested, is Australian or New Zealand. We can find out later. And I saw all these ads, which were just, taxi companies saying, welcome up, like sort of hanging out, like it feels a general sense of things are getting better in the UK, which is a great feeling right now.
Great to hear things are improving. It seems like the curve's going in the right direction around the world now. Never know, you might be getting Australian tourists soon.
Pretty much. I mean, there's green lists now. We've got green, amber and red lists of different places we can go to. You just think that if you're on that list, well, your tourism is just, ding, ding, ding. You're doing great things this summer.
Your profession does sound entirely relevant to the point of our podcast, and it's a real privilege to capture your time for an hour here. Could you tell us whether or not you have a number one intellectual investing or behavioural science hero, preferably from the last category?
Do you know, there's one that I've had for years, and this is the one who got me into behavioural science, and that is Rory Sutherland. But the thing is, I've now sort of achieved my dream job. This man is now my boss's boss, so it feels a bit chummy to mention this. So there's another one actually, which came across a few years ago. This is a guy called Christakis, and really he looks at networks and the power of networks. How ideas spread through a network, how a disease spreads, which we've all become really familiar with now. Like for example, social change is sigmoidal. It goes in an S shape. It starts very, very slowly, and then it just catches on like fire. Like Me Too, for example, or BLM, sort of simmering along in the background, then boom, like things spread through networks, ideas. So I think he's a great one, I think, because anyone who sort of inspires you to then pursue a load of effort down a certain route, I think is a bit of a hero to me, to be honest. Like if you mention a book today, which now sets off an entire different venture of thought for me, I think that's a great thing. So I think, Nicholas Christakis is a great example actually, because really got me into networks a few years ago, and now I sort of see the world through networks and how things are all connected to each other.
Yeah, well, that actually reminds me of how I came across you. I literally just asked you, can we interview on Twitter? And you're making me think about the idea of propagation, yes. and how ideas can be propagated at scale. Hopefully, we can propagate what you're going to tell us about.
Interesting to think about networks, because it leads to the next question about investments. And I know you've obviously done a fair bit of reading around networks and those ideas. Has that ever led on to you an investment that you thought was worthwhile, or avoiding something, for example, either because of its network effects in the underlying business or not?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I've personally not applied this to investing, but one thing I did realize was sort of a light bulb moment. It's like, it's not actually the value of the company or the value of anything, it's just if we all agree it is, essentially. And this made me think with Tesla, for example, as a good example of like, no idea on the fundamentals of the company. I sort of understand it's sort of bit of hot air, but like from a network point of view, that's kind of okay, because if 7 million people think it's okay and it's valuable, that doesn't matter. That's fine. So I think like there's enough Elon Musk fanboys out there to keep this stock kind of puffed up quite a bit. But from a network point of view, there's, as long as people believe it. So it does make me think as well. GameStop is another one that, it's spread through the network, this sort of idea of this one. And if there's enough people within a network who all agree on something, then surely, the stock goes up, whether or not the company is fundamentally valuable. So it does make me think actually, like if we were, it's the constraint is how visible something is in the network. And the more visible it comes, the more people will invest in it. So I suppose if you were to play the network, it's like, how can I make this the most visible within the network? And as soon as you see one person who is very Whereas influence in the network, if, for example, if Warren Buffett suddenly drops a load into Bitcoin, that's going to shoot up because we trust him. So like by looking at him as a point, a network point, you can then, I don't know, you could either plan this from an intervention point, or you could just observe it, that when this person, the cool kid on the playground, does his one behavior, then the second coolest, the third coolest, the fourth coolest will then follow that behavior. So I suppose identifying the cool kids, you could definitely approach this as investing. Just if you had, I don't know, social listening, and you looked whenever people with a certain amount of followers tweeted something, a stock mention maybe, that's probably fairly predictive that other people start to invest in that too, from a sort of network perspective. So I've not tried this, but theoretically it's there for the taking.
But you didn't fall victim to the influence of Elon Musk on SNL.
No. But I do see Dogecoin right now is going through the roof, and I'm feeling a slight bit of FOMO. I know it's basic gambling, but the fact is these returns are ridiculous, just from Elon Musk tweeting it. So
just pursuing what you have invested in, you've been very sensible.
Yeah, I basically decided that I'm going to stop going after specific companies, because that goes up and down. And there's certain companies like Adobe I fundamentally trust in. I know them. I know the financials. I know the company. I sort of have faith in them. But it's a lot of effort to get to that level where you really feel confident about a company. So what I've sort of said to myself is, what, just chuck it all in ETFs or indexes, or just a fold of stocks is what I need to be doing, just spreading the risk, I think. And it's been good for me, to be honest. When you look at the returns, it's consistent and it's predictable. And I think the challenge, though, is going to be, this thing's going absolutely bananas. Let's take some money out of the ETF and put it in this growth stock. So I think I'm still early days. So in a year's time, we'll see how much is still in ETFs. But that is my current plan, just because, it's just a savings account plus is how I'm seeing stocks at this point, not this magical beast which is going to make millions.
That's an interesting comment that you make. You'll see in a year's time where you are in terms of that plan. So is that an indicator of the stage gate or time frame that you're looking at to make a change?
I think it's just the realization that we are so present biased as people, and we just want to fiddle with our stocks. And so I'm saying my plan right now is to do ETFs, but I sort of recognize that takes a lot of, dedication, actually. So I'm just realizing, just because, I realize how people work, and that we like to make these present decisions, not the future decisions. So the test will be in a year's time, what percentage of my portfolio is an ETF? Just recognizing that I know I'm going to have to make a decision at some point when something's going really well in another thing. Do I put more money into that? But no, I'm thinking long term with this. I'm thinking this is going to be something that's here for 10, 15, 20 years.
What's your percentage split at the moment between ETFs and other?
I think it's more like 40 or 50 at this point. I'm sort of transitioning out of stocks into ETFs. And I think I'd like to get to a point where maybe 60, 70%, maybe even 75% is ETFs, and just see it more as a savings account than anything else, to be honest.
It's very similar to the approach that I'm taking as well. Until I can prove that I'm a successful active investor, most of my portfolio is going to be in either ETFs or index funds.
You were mentioning maybe 1 year and a gradual process. A time frame that's been on Ben and my mind since the first episode has been 108 years, though. How would you respond as an Ogilvy consultant to a client coming in and saying, design me a behavior regime so that I can be successful over that time period, making $1 billion through consistent investing only in index funds? Would you laugh me out of the office, or do you think you could do something?
I mean, we definitely relish the challenge, to be honest. And I've been thinking about this for the last week, actually, a lot, actually, because I think it's a really, really interesting challenge. And it's just because when we talk about these really difficult behavior challenges, we talk about things like pensions, which is 30, 40 years away. But what you're asking here is literally double that, and you won't even be alive for it. So it's like, it's a massive behavior. So I think the first step, I think, would be breaking down the brief, because it's not one brief, this is many briefs. And from first thought, it's really like, I wrote these get who to statements of like, so what is the objective? First of all, we want to be really tight with this, which you've already been very tight with, but interventions that have specific objectives just perform better. And I think even scaling back this a little bit would be the thing of like, what's the first step that we need to achieve to then get to the second step? So I mean, I think there's really at least two briefs. The first one is like, get, let's say, 18 to 34-year-olds, whatever the age group is, who don't currently save or don't currently invest in this way, to the first behavior, start investing with the intention of their children doing the same. It's the first one, just start now. And then the sort of challenge 2 after that is like, get, I don't know, maybe 18 to 34-year-olds again, whose parents have started this dynasty, whatever you like to call it, to then continue investing in the dynasty. Like, there's actually very different behaviors there. And sort of a brainwave moment this morning where I realized this is an acquisition thing to start with, but it's also heavily retention. And so I'd sort of start to think, well, where is this problem being solved elsewhere? Retention as a business problem, because of course, if you're a subscription, if you're you want your customers to repeat, there's a lot of learning there which we can probably draw on. So I would start with that, actually. First of all, a strong brief a manageable brief with clear objectives. And I think then a behavior change model could be really helpful here. So one that I might suggest is COMB. Don't know if you're familiar with this, doing a COMB analysis. But
COMB.
Essentially, it says COMB. And they each stand for something. So the B is for behavior. So say the behavior is we want to get we're in the office, we want to get Ben to walk up the stairs instead of taking the lift in the office. Or capability is the first one. Does Ben have the physical capability to do this? Ben is going to need legs for this. That is a fact. Or at least means to help that. So
show us your legs, Ben.
I need a bit more strengthening exercises, I think, but hopefully I can get up one flight of stairs.
Okay, and then, but say we find you can only get up one flight. It's like, okay, that's a physical barrier. What can we do? We're going to put a stair lift for the last one, which is on the second floor here. And then the one might be mental capabilities. Do you understand the task? What's the sort of knowledge barriers at play, which I think is already a massive one for you investing. And then the next one, usually capability, is motivation. And there's reflective motivation, which is sort of the rational, you thinking about the problem. Then there's automatic motivation, which is stuff like how are you subconsciously being influenced by these things, where you're not really rationally thinking about it, but it's having an influence. And the research says that 95% of all decisions are made automatically. Only 5% are really properly like, I decided to do this, which is nuts. Then the third one, honestly. So motivation, maybe you don't want to. Maybe you're just a bit tired today, for example. So you're not feeling very motivated. Or maybe, I don't know, you were heavily primed by a lift. Maybe you walked in and you saw an advert for a lift. You're heavily influenced by like, oh, today's the lift. And then the third one is opportunity, and there's physical and social. So the physical opportunity is like the lift design. Is the lift like 50 meters away, or is it 50 meters closer? The stairs are like 50 meters away. The physical opportunity of that is just so much harder, because naturally you're going to walk into the one that's easiest. And then socially, do you identify, or does your office identify as, stair walking people? Like, are you a stair walker or you're a lift taker? There might be a bit of divide, and that is a social barrier. It's nothing to do with your capability or motivation. It just, you feel like a weirdo doing this behavior. So I think I would start to approach it like that. What is a COMB analysis to work out where's the greatest need in terms of this challenge, the brief that we've decided to work on.
So C is a capability. What was O again?
Opportunity, physical and social.
Okay, motivation is M, I guess.
Yeah, that was automatic and reflective.
Okay, and B is behavior.
that's where I'd start, I think. We start with some big diagnosis phase to work out, is this, I mean, for example, capability. I don't know how to invest in the first instance. There's going to be a point where people don't know how to invest. That's a capability issue. You're going to have to like educate people to a level that they can even understand this, both physically and mentally, because a lot of people, it's a different world. The motivation side, it's like, well, what do I get out of this? 100 years, I'm not going to be here. That's a really big one. That one.
Like, it is, and that when we first had that discussion in that episode, like I knew that we had to. That was the number one issue we had to solve. And I think actually in the second episode where we interviewed Tom, the clinical psych, I used the term dopamine drought because we got into a bit of discussion about how we could use hormones basically to juice us up for, I guess, the automatic decision making and somehow to motivate us. Yeah. So in your consulting experience, have you worked on projects where you have had a task, I don't know if it's from the government, like from a nudge unit or something like that, where they want to encourage behavior that persists over the long term?
I've never worked on something this long term. I mean, probably the biggest one, the most maybe related, is food waste is something I've worked on, which is just a massive environmental scourge. Like, it's worse than aviation. I think from memory, it's 31% of global emissions. Like, it's really bad. If you bin the lettuce, it's like 15 times worse than the plastic it's in. So this is a similar one where it's like, we can't just do one behavior. This is not like, make sure more people click onto this specific thing on a website. We'll make the button bigger maybe, or something, like make it more salient. It's like a whole system of behaviors. I think that's one, anything where because it's similar, it's environmental in that it's beyond us, the impact of this. We have to work now for future benefit, which we don't really see now. So that's definitely one that I've had to work on. And I think my conclusion with these things is it's no one thing. Like, I'm really interested in systems thinking, and we're solving things at component level. Optimize this thing, but like, unless you're optimizing the whole system, you're just not going to make the right change. Like, there's no one magic bullet for this solution. For behavior.
Just reflecting a bit more on, and maybe just to check some of these ideas, there's a couple of terms for the same concept that we've come across. One is delayed discounting, and another one is hyperbolic discounting, which is basically about the idea that something that is a long way into the future, especially something that, as you've said a couple of times, is beyond our lifespan, the value of it dramatically decreases. It's like it's a hyperbolic function where almost it becomes impossible to be motivated by it once you get beyond a certain time threshold. So yeah, I'd be interested to know if you have any comments about how to amplify the meaning of something to compensate for the delayed discounting.
Yeah, I mean, this is massive, and it reminds me of I forget his name, Luca something. He spoke at Nudge Talk last year, which is the world's largest festival of behavioral science. So we run behavioral science and creativity. But he speaker last year said, like, putting the incentives in the present is really key. Because, for example, if we want to get people to wash their hands in the office, we could give them a pint at the end of the month. Well done you. We give them £5 or whatever. But actually, if you just give them nice soap, they'll do the behavior. Like, that's way more motivating because the incentive is in the present instead of some future reward, which is not motivating. But I think one thing that really is coming up to me, so if the provocation here is how might we put the incentives in the present, because the payoff is, just 3 generations later. So the provocation, how might we put incentives in the present? And it sort of made me think of what can we learn from heirlooms and things that are passed down from generation to generation, like that, all of that stuff. Even religion is one that's passed down. We can learn a lot from that because it's still here, 5 generations, 1,000 years later. And I think one way actually is time priming, getting people to think in this future sense. So I don't know if you're familiar with Zimbardo. He did the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah.
That's what he's most known for. But actually, he's got this whole other sphere of work that not many people know about, and this is time perspectives. And actually there's as many as, I think it's either 6 or 9 time perspectives that we shift in and out of throughout the day. So there's like prenatal is like before birth, which if you're Buddhist, that's a big thing. What was happening in my life beforehand to affect me now? Then there's like past negative, like our bad times, or like past positive, the good old days, which, you think of Trump, Brexit, all these things, it's take back control to the good old days. It was better behind us. Then there's like hedonistic, like really in the moment, like I want pizza, I don't want vegetables, like this would be good now. Then I think this is where it gets interesting, which I think is where you can start to sort of tide away this hyperbolic discounting, is future positive, future negative. So how do we get people to think more positive about the future? Or even beyond that is transcendental beliefs, because this is what religion is, right? It's like, do things in your life now, which are then going to benefit you later. So like, don't get really drunk tonight because that's bad for you, your body's a temple, because this is going to affect you later in life. Beyond when you've died, this will affect you, these decisions you make now. So I think we really need to be thinking of like, how can we get transcendental beliefs? Because this really has to elevate beyond you, actually, that if we are going to have a long-term behavior, we need to have some emotional significance to that. So
yeah, I like this idea of activating people emotionally, and because another thing that's come up in this journey we've gone on in what's now we're up to our 20th episode. Early on, it became clear that most people's response to the investing challenge when it comes to thinking about it behaviorally is try to remove the potential for behavioral factors, especially to drain all of the emotion out of it. Mm-hmm. And, I thought that sounded like a pretty good idea. And, we had a great podcast guest, the guy from Breaking the Market. He's like an engineering manager at a big engineering company. So he's like, the paragon of how to be as rational and mechanistic as possible. Emotions have a lot of potential. They can, if you deploy them correctly, and if you avoid deploying them incorrectly, there's a lot of motivational power.
I think it's we need to consider it. I think because ego is massive for this one. Like I think a simple idea like naming after you. This is not the dynasty. This is Ben's dynasty. Like you need to, because again you're putting the incentive in the present is what you're doing there. It's like I get to call this Ben's dynasty, which then I know that this is going to live on beyond me. And there's like
Ben's billions.
Yeah, Ben's billions. Like we'll give it a name and it'll become a norm. We're already just inventing a name makes the behavior feel less weird. So we should just give this behavior that we're doing a name to start with. Would be a really great start, because it's now like designated drivers, the example that always comes up. That was a word invented by behavioral scientists that now makes it socially permissible for you to not be drinking, and that was invented by, and then it was spread through soaps was how this term came up, because before it was like a bit, why are you drinking a Coke, mate? Like why are you drinking? Like, so just inventing a term would be a great start. But just on this future generations thing, it just reminded me of the watch company Patek Philippe. They have a lovely line which is, you never actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation. That's the sort of stuff you need, because this now, you've reframed it from this watch you own, which is really expensive now, as something that is never lost. You don't lose it. It merely flows through the generations, because that's a key thing, is actually the loss aversion. Because if I'm never going to see this, what's the point? Where's the payoff for me? So this is starting to get you to think in a different way about this.
There's a reward from being a good custodian.
Exactly. And it may be, yeah, for sure. I think so. It reminds me of parents moving countries for their kids and things. Like they've really, it's not about them. They're doing it for the kids, or for the kids' kids, future generations. And so people can make these sacrifices, but you need to sort of elevate it to something transcendental. Like, I mean, the US Army does this. You were fighting not fighting for the sake of this, you're fighting for freedom. You're fighting for liberal democracy, is what you're fighting for. ISIS as well. You're not fighting for the sake of it. You're fighting for this thing you stand up to. So like you need to have this thing that we're all fighting for, which is a bit transcendental, which goes beyond all of us. Is really where you need to start to. You need to like get people to thinking like beyond just the small timescales.
Yeah, to me something clicked there because there's an immediate reward if you are constantly recognized for being a good custodian.
Exactly.
You're seen by everybody around you as not messing it up. I mean, sounds like a terribly low bar, but at least there's some recognition for, a potential for reward in the now.
I'd like the high level concepts and the goals and ideas that are larger than oneself and some sort of larger objective to go to, but you can also turn the conversation towards the mechanics of things. And one of the first things that you mentioned, David, was a subscription model, for example. And if you've ever subscribed to Netflix or a magazine, the way that works is essentially you sign up and then there's no further action on your behalf that is required. The transactions happen in the background. Each month, $10 or $15 is taken out of your account. And that's a really interesting model and a very useful model, I would suspect, because it doesn't require you then to do any forward or proactive action going forward. And you could apply that to, whether it's a Vanguard investment fund or whatever it may be, just to have that constant money being pulled out of your account. It's a set model that you could apply. And then I guess the next challenge, once you set it up for yourself, is then having some way for that to legally transition onto the next generation. So I do like the idea of the bigger goals and something bigger than yourself, and developing that culture within your own family. But you can also start thinking about things as a set and forget model, a subscription model. So that ties
absolutely
to the
completely. This is, I think, would be key to all of this is you need to sort of have these reasons for you're doing it, which is a reason you tell other people. But the actual behavior, we want to remove as much behavior as possible from this. Like ideally, this is we call it making a default. Can we even just making decisions for people? As far as possible. Pre-filled boxes, pre-filled everything. So it's really just press it and go. I think would be critical to this because it can't be something that you manage because, like I mentioned before, I want to fiddle. If my investment, I'm going to fiddle with it because you want to. So anything to just automate this would be fantastic and separate it from your own account so you never really see, you never can play with it. Lock it in. Even like adding more friction to even touch this account would be a thing. If it might be, usually we're saying, remove friction, but actually friction is good sometimes. Like make it difficult for you to really like go in and fiddle with your things, maybe require a different family member or, three-factor authentication or something. Like make it difficult for you to play with it. Like
make you have to walk 50 meters before you.
Yeah, exactly. And people don't mind this when it's for the behaviors that they're trying to do. Like my gym app, for example, I don't mind my gym app being addictive in the same way that I might be a bit annoyed at Facebook for trying to hack my dopamine. But actually people wouldn't mind if Duolingo or their gym app was sort of playing on this. So I think you're completely right there. Actually, I think there's more to be done with goals as well, which I know you've touched on before with in the second one, we had a psychologist on. I think this is also gonna be critical. And I think maybe even breaking it down, like this is a billion goal, but that's really, really unachievable. That doesn't feel achievable. So can you like have tiered goals, for example? So you'll notice on like Kickstarter, all these GoFundMe type websites, it's like we're almost there, we're 85% towards 1,000. And then, it just happens like, we're now 24% towards 5,000. And the progress bar is always like 85% there. This is because of the goal gradient effect, which essentially says that as we approach a goal, when we put more effort towards it. So the example for this is usually Starbucks loyalty cards. They give you 12 stamps, but the person will go stamp when you get it, give you a sense of progression, you complete it 20% faster. But my favorite example is rats will literally run faster towards food as they approach it. So how can we do this? We need to like make little mini like mini milestones, which can be as small as, well done, you did your first 1,000, your first 2,000, or your first million, because that is way more motivating than just this thing you never tap away at. You never see any dent on the progress bar. So definitely, because then you get the reward.
With that, would you need to make sure you setting those goals based on your actual contribution to the fund rather than the actual performance of the fund overall? Because you are playing in the stock market, so you may get a couple of years where you have negative results. And I'm wondering whether that would have negative motivation on an individual.
That's a really interesting point, actually, because if your progress bar is going like up, 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 and then there's a big crash, and it for like 5-10 years, it's now in reverse. You raise a really good point there. That would not be motivating.
It wouldn't be motivating at all.
Yeah, you'd be like, well, why am I doing this? I'm literally losing money. So maybe it should be on contribution. But it doesn't even matter what the goals are, to be honest. Like as long as they're there, you're working towards something, which may just be invented. Like, I don't know, LinkedIn, when you put your profile, it's like your profile's all star. Like, what does that mean? There's your profile is expert, and then there's one above that. Like, the point is to have these things, because then you work towards them, and then you achieve them, you go to the next one. Yeah, it just feels like this needs chunking up, to be honest, because otherwise it's just completely unmanageable.
Sure. Sorry if I looked like I was distracted. I just realized there's so many good concepts you're mentioning. I'm just taking some notes. So what I've got so far is COM-B, goal gradient, mini milestones, friction, the 9 forms of time, which was Zimbardo's research, and I'm going to note that down, just that researcher. I think we better do some reading there. And reward through being a good custodian. Have I missed any?
Friction.
Friction, I got that.
Friction. I mean,
and there was chunks.
Yeah, I think also just smaller briefs, more manageable briefs to start with. If you're tackling this, you're going to have to chop up this challenge. Otherwise, it's way too big. Like, yeah, I think another provocation might be like, if we're talking about the design of this, the scheme or whatever. What is the design of the environment? Can we do something that, because this is always this really big influence which we don't look at so much. Like, how is your living setting? How is your everything in your life pointing towards this behavior? Would just be, it's a provocation to put out there. Like, I mean, one idea I had was that, like, for retention, it's can we make this tangible? Can we make the sense progression more tangible than just a progress bar on there? Like, do you send people something every year? So you've got like a book or something, or not quite a certificate, but are you familiar with the Mr. Men books, which as they line up, it creates a word?
Right.
Have you seen this?
Oh, I haven't.
No.
So Mr. Men books, familiar from like childhood, was these books, they're just characters. But as you buy one, there's like a little piece on the spine, which as you buy more of them, creates a whole scene, which a word that completes itself, for example. So what you might want to do here is like, okay, let's send people like a book every year or something, which goes on their mantelpiece, which they can show. This is good for social norming, because you see that, well, you're now norming the behavior, you're making it permissible for other people, because you see that, oh, you've got that thing. But, could we do something where we have what we call the completeness effect, where we love to make things line up. So with these books, might they make a scene that only completes if you keep going with this behavior, for example? So, by creating a sense of incompleteness with this physical object, so it lines up properly only if you keep the behavior going. Like, I was thinking, because it's like a physical progress bar, right? Like a water bottle, I think, is a great example. Like, I have this 2-litre bottle of water, and I can see as a progress bar what my completion rate is, and it's very physical. I didn't even opt for that. So, like, make it tangible, something in your environment which is making this behavior more likely. Just feels like an interesting thing to think about. I don't know what the answer is.
I was thinking, because this is a funny way to put it, but in movies, you've got like a prisoner marking months or days on the wall.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Ben's billionaire prison.
Yeah, like you're facilitating the behavior and you're walking towards it. And the key thing is you're moving forward. There's like a sense of progression to this, which is what we always
actually want. It reminds me of when I was a young, eager geospatial analyst working at Fleur on a gas pipeline project. And the only thing that was meaningful for me was saving up for a Buell motorbike. And I printed out a nice A3 color image of it. And I sectioned it off into 8 sections that I sort of hatched out each month as I saved the chunk of money towards buying the whole bike. It turns out I've never bought one because I went overseas for a placement in another job and I gave up on that goal.
Wow.
But that was one way that I tried to make the progress towards it tangible by, just sections of the image of the bike.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great. That is a physical progress bar, sense progression. But you said, I just want to explore that more. You said you stopped it when you moved to another place.
Yeah, I did a placement in Cambodia with Engineers Without Borders. So I went from, basically I was earning 10% of the salary. It was just, enough to survive in Cambodia whilst you did good. And then I came back and 6 months later, I was off to Kuwait. I could have bought the bike on a 1 month salary when I was there. And I did end up getting a bike, but it wasn't that one. And it's a pity, actually, because I really love that bike. Maybe I should.
Well, it's never too late for a midlife crisis, never too early. It's just, what made me think of there is that, habits die in new environments is something I've learned. Essentially, I was wondering if that was a thing, which then made me think of the other thing, which is the fresh start effect, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but essentially people are way more likely to make start new behaviors at temporal landmarks. So really,
landmarks?
Temporal, time landmarks.
Temporal landmarks, yep.
So places in time. And the example that people tend to give is like gyms. More people sign up to gyms on Mondays, or January is the first month of the year people do a load of effort into like developing themselves. But actually, they're kind of boring examples. So I looked into this a while back, and I came across some research which found that people whose birthdays end in 9 are way more likely to do certain behaviors because they are, a 19-year-old, 29-year-old, 30, 39-year-old. You're not quite 40, but you're just on the cusp. And so, from memory, in a selection of 500 marathon runners, you're 47% more likely to have a 9 ending birthday in just a selection. Like, we wouldn't expect as many, but there's, for some reason, 47% more 9 ending birthday people here. And that could be 29, 39, 89. Another one is infidelity websites. 17% more likely to have 9 enders. And they did other research to see if it was like, is it because people put their fake name as for fake age as there, but it's not actually. People tend to put 0s or 5s. So that it's a thing. Even suicide is one. You're like, I think it's like 0.34 per 100,000. It goes like 0.45. So it's like 2% increase, I think. You're more likely at a temporal landmark. So like the provocation here is like, what landmarks can we use? That when is the best moment to like be asking people to make these changes? Which may be, it may be more effective if instead of asking a 28-year-old, ask a 29-year-old, or like your birthday, what's happening on your birthday? Key points, when you graduate university, when you start your new job, these are the moments that we need to be like reaching people and telling them, do you want to start this new behavior? Like that's the most opportune moment we could start this.
It's all about prompting, and this reminds me of the chat we had with another psychologist, Joy LeRae, and we brought up the idea of using her to help design an app, and what she mentioned as the main thing that the app could do was to give constant feedback. And that, by the way, also relates to the interview we had with Ross Bentley, who was the race car driver coach. And he talked about how he actually had a little formula, what was it? What was the formula again, Ben?
My memory is something along the lines of practice.
It was about mental imagery, right? And if you
Like if you make it more visible in the mind, you're more likely to do the behavior.
Yeah, it was. You'll reach a goal if you have a clear, if it's clear, which you mentioned at the start. We won't get anywhere unless we have a clear description of what the target is. But you need constant feedback plus awareness, and that will get you to the goal. But if you don't have the awareness of the difference and constant awareness of the difference between the mental image, which is what you want to happen, and constant awareness of the divergence between that state and your current state, you won't reach the goal. And basically what Joy was saying was that what an app can give you is in your hand all the time, this vibrating thing. It can literally vibrate and interrupt reality for you to give you, and also if those messages could be delivered in an addictive way. I don't know, I just...
For sure that is it's like the whole progress bar thing. It's like I was there, I'm now here. We just need this sense of progression, which really is just, that's describing feedback. The lived experience of progression is just feedback. We're zooming out and seeing a progress bar, but lived experience is a ping to say, you're here, you're doing great. We can learn a lot from apps, actually. Social media, any Duolingo, your streaks, for example. Streaks would be a great thing for this behavior. You've been doing this for how many days in a row, months in a row, days in a row. Okay. Like, it's the only challenge with streaks is there's a backfire effect when you lose one. So I know two people who did Duolingo for like a year, an entire year. But one day they, like for my dad, he went on holiday. He didn't do it for a few days, has not touched Spanish in like 2 years. Another friend who had, again, was like 2 years into a Duolingo streak every single day for like 700 days. And then he was super hungover on the first day of 2020. And he just didn't have the physical capability to do the behavior. And he's not touched it since. There's a strong backfire effect. You need actually forgiving streaks is what you need. So it's like, oh, you almost missed your streak. You've got a second chance to make it right now.
Right.
You need to build that in. Otherwise,
forgiving streak.
Yeah, because otherwise it's so demotivating. Like, you've literally lost like 20 years of your life if you just don't do the behavior once.
Yeah. This is also, so Ben and I spent so long before we even started recording episodes. We thought a lot about this. And one thing that came up frequently was, how can we basically, because poker machines are designed to use the sorts of things you've been mentioning to hack the human mind. Also, there's a bunch of social proofing that goes on, I think, in the casino environment too. It's like we're helpless almost. And what Ben and I wanted to do was to use all the same effects and to create a device. And we've found through our investing network, we found a developer, actually. He's French, but he's living in New York, I think. And we had a couple of discussions with him about even developing an app that basically will be like a reverse poker machine and compound people's money in their pockets, rather than using a bunch of hacks and deception to compound what they should be using to generate a nice retirement for themselves in the poker machine owner's pocket.
Yes, completely. What you're talking about there, forgive me if this is you seem like you're very familiar with this already, is variable rewards versus fixed rewards. And I don't know if
operant conditioning.
Yes, well, specifically, I don't know if you read this book, Hooked, but this is where it describes it, how to build habit-forming products. And this is going to be on Facebook's desk, Twitter's desk, any app designer's desk, basically. And this is how do you design habit-forming products. And what you're talking about there is making rewards variable, because fixed rewards are like, okay, for example, if I open my fridge and there's always going to be, I don't know, a tiramisu there, like that's fun for a bit. Nice reward, but I expect it. But it's way, way more motivating if I open my fridge and there's a trifle. Open my fridge, there's no food out, there's nothing there. open up again, and it's like, I don't know, it's a bag of dog poo. The next one is 2 trifles. The next is 10 trifles. Like, that is way more addictive, like the slot machine, because it's variable. And what happens in your brain is you get dopamine as you anticipate the reward. Like, is there going to be a reward? Is there going to be a reward? And then you get another shot as you open it, and there is reward. And Twitter does this really well. When you open up, you'll notice it takes like a split second for your notifications.
I've noticed that.
It's very deliberate, because it's not, it's not because it's loading or anything like that. It's because as you're waiting that split second, you get a shot of dopamine where you're like, does someone love me?
I totally do.
And then you get it. Like, so you can really play with this, and it makes it addictive. So like, if you are going to do an app, because it feels like we're going to need some institution almost, you're going to have to build a brand for this. You have to make this a thing, so it feels like a something. How can we make the rewards variable, beyond, they can be psychological rewards as well. It doesn't have to be physical rewards. Like, money is the outcome, but make it variable. Sometimes give them triple rewards, give them no rewards sometimes. The point is, you want to make the slot machine how can we get a slot machine going, basically, is what we should be doing.
What are some of the rewards that you could have in that type of app? Because when you play a poker machine, the reward is some sort of cash back to yourself. When you go on Twitter, you've said the reward is some sort of social interaction. For example, someone's either liked one of your comments, or they've made a response to one of your comments. We'll need to think about that a little bit more, won't we, Will? What will the novelty of the reward be?
I think there's 2 ways to think about this. Is physical rewards. So something, this is the sort of thing where, say this was through you, there was like a slight fee you took, a tiny fee, but this was now meant you could keep your servers running. And what's the thing you send? Like we mentioned, how do we send something physical to them? It could be that could be some sort of reward. We know that companies do this, subscriptions, they'll send you like, oh, here's a free something, whatever. Like, but the other way to think about this is psychological rewards. What is something that is psychologically compelling, which was working for a bank who was trying to acquire students in South Africa. And one thing we looked at was like, there's a lot of reward, a lot of pride around these people graduating. So like the psychological reward is like, how do I make my mum proud, basically? And there's a lot of things around this. This is the picture of you graduating in your gowns and all of that. That's a psychological reward as much as anything. So like, how can we get more of those sort of behaviors was the provocation for how to think more about this. And even badges, things like that, they're trivial and you talk about them, but the behavioral outcome is not trivial. The social point of this is like I've written some notes, like cohorts, with assumption through your family actually, but we know that accountability buddies are really, really powerful for doing behaviors. So does it have to be within your family? Because there's so many other social things with this. Like one is, finally, you need to get your partner on board with this is really big. This is critical because it's like, it takes a village is one way to think about it, to do this behavior. Who's going to keep you accountable, especially if there's a membership thing to this? And then it's like, how do we, what can we learn from private clubs, for example? It's invite only. That makes it 10 times more interesting than if it's anyone can just walk in. Like there's actually, we want this to be for everyone, democratizing, but there's also a strong argument for making this.
We want, as much as poker machines are for everyone, we want this to be for everyone. Sorry to butt in.
Well, this is it. There's a 2 sides to this, which is like, we want this to be democratized. Everyone can do this. But there's also the point that it's way more motivating if it feels a bit exclusive. If you can make this feel slightly exclusive, like making it invite only, for example, there's benefits of that in that, for example, your acquisitions, your people you sort of bring into this are way more likely to be the sort of right people who would be successful in this, because people who would be good for this. You do the hard work. And it's like Clubhouse was invite only, membership clubs, there's a lot to be learned from that. I need to feel part of the tribe. I think you mentioned before, like, we're not making a cult here. And it's like, true, you're not. But to be honest, you should learn a lot from cults. Look into the mechanism that they use. How do they solve the same problems? Because you're not making a cult, but religion is another one. Like, they've literally built cathedrals around facilitating this behavior. So
Yeah.
what can we learn from that? You know, what is our equivalent of a cathedral? You know, these things are in every town and city, like, well,
Yeah.
city, that what makes a city. But like cohorts, it's networks, it's stickiness, because it's not just because of them, not because you lose money, it's now because, oh, I lose my access to these people. Like tribes, how can you make a stronger tribe? How do you signal to the in-groups, you know, really subtly, that we're part of the same thing? Like internationally, like tattoos, I don't know. Yeah, you know, gangs, what from gangs, they have tattoos, like
Fight Club.
You see it
Pardon?
in martial
Yeah,
arts,
Fight
for
Club, yeah.
example.
Pardon?
I was just going to say, you see it in martial arts where they have those different ranks. You go from a yellow belt to a green to a black, and it shows competency, but there's also that prestige associated with having one of the higher colours. That's the type of...
No, exactly. Like they've solved the problem over there. What can we learn from that?
I was thinking about your idea of having physical rewards as well, and one of the ideas that I initially had for that would be that if you are part of this club or this group, that you just a small percentage of your actual portfolio is skimmed off the top and it goes into a pool of funds, and the more that you adhere to the rules, and those rules are essentially investing more, then you collect some of that funds, and people that aren't able to maintain that consistency, that streak approach that you talked about, then they're penalised by not getting some of those funds, for example. It would have to be quite minor. It would have to be either an initial contribution, $50 or whatever it may be, or a skimming off the top of the portfolio, something obviously a lot less than 1%, but can't up too much of a penalty. But I'm just wondering if that would work, because that sort of falls into that poker machine methodology where everyone's contributing ultimately, or lottery approach where everyone's contributing and someone's getting, or many people are getting, through the right behaviour, access to some of that pool.
That's a really interesting idea, because again, you're just putting some of the rewards in the present. It's not leaving it to 109 years later. You're putting some of that. Like, it almost made me think, like, 108, but the 109th you get to spend it.
That's true. What a year that's gonna be!
Like,
oh my god!
It's like it's ridiculous. Like, oh, this behavior, it's crazy. So how can we do something? And one sort of dumb idea, which I think you just solved actually, was that, like, what if this is not 3 generations? This is a 4-generation task, but the agreement is, well, you're doing a lot of work here. You're going to get a percentage of this. It's going to take longer, but the point is, by you doing this, at least you can still buy this. You're not losing anything. Like the chunk, the main part of this is for investing for the future, but like a little bit you do get to spend while you're alive, seeing as you are doing this behavior.
It could be the custodian reward, or the recognition.
Custodian is an interesting way of framing it, actually, because it's the looking after for. It's just, yeah. It
sounds a bit stuffy, but
well, this is where you'd think about what this is, and you maybe do some testing, and you want a name. I think is critical to this, because it normalizes the behavior, basically.
The app's going to be called Investment Machine.
Investment Machine is it actually, or is this just floating around?
I want that to be the name of the app.
We haven't decided what the name of the app is. I think Will just threw that out just then. So
because it's a riff on Poker Machine. Like in Australia, I think we have some of the worst rates of gambling in Australia, and a lot of it's driven by poker machines. There was actually a Tasmanian politician who ran on an anti-poker machine platform. Maybe it's not the scourge of poker machines is not as big of an issue for people in other countries. So maybe they don't understand.
I think, you want this name to be sticky. You want it easy to talk about in conversation. as much as possible. Simple word that feels, universal. Because also, like, even how does this translate to other languages? Is this international thing? I think this is where I can't promise to like solve these things, but this is where you would then get someone who really knows what they're talking about, branding, who names products or whatnot, things like that. Like it's worth the investment to get a strong name that makes this feel sticky. And there's great TED Talks on this of like how to name products. Is it something abstract? Like, for example, Microsoft Office. It's not literally an office, but it's where Office things happen. It's what, Office behaviors, PowerPoint, Excel, all of that. But like Skype, made up word. Or like machine. Here you're talking about machine. As you put something in, comes out. Black box does its magic. Boom.
Money machine.
Yeah, like, and also think of like how is this gonna survive 108 years, because we can't. I don't know, blockchain or something or anything technological might quickly age.
I think maybe what you've brought up is how we need to change from the goal of 108 years to it just being a way of life.
Yeah, honestly, maybe it is. It's more like a lifestyle choice, a bit like Christianity or the Alpha Course or any of these things. Like, I'm doing this thing, like, because you want to fuse it to people's identities as well as much as possible, which is why this transcendental thing is so powerful, because it's like my brothers in arms. This is me. And then you need these strong delineated things like I am someone who invests. I'm someone who is building a dynasty. Like all of these things which fuse it to your identity, which is where the tribes come in, because that's when you can then make it feel like I'm part of something. But maybe lifestyle is the way. It's definitely, because it is literally your life. Like if this is
and
something
that shows how important it is to have some interim rewards, so that you're not living as a monk in a cave on water and rice.
With your mobile phone and app that's buzzing.
just salivating over the responses from your phone as you sip your water.
That was actually really great input, David. I do appreciate that, but we've just got a couple last questions to cover. The first one is something that we always ask guests. What is our mental hygiene equivalent of washing your hands that everyone should do, in your view?
Oh, that's a really good question, this. Mental hygiene equivalent of washing your hands. And there's so many ways you could go about this question. And they all sound kind of lame, but that's why they're washing hands is kind of lame, but it's good, I think one is, smiling is something that I found is so valuable. Like I've got opportunities just from being the only one smiling when everyone else is miserable. Just, I think is really key. That's something I've really learned, actually, that it does just keep a smile, and it spreads again at network level. So that feels like one for sure, but that also feels really lame.
That's fine. I sometimes forget to smile myself, and it can have an effect on you, just yourself. I
mean, I probably shouldn't get into this, because it's fascinating research into like how, actually, I might as well, people with Botox will actually, they can't empathize as well as other people. The reason why is because when I smile, it pings something in your brain which makes you smile, because mirror neurons. But people with Botox, it paralyzes the face a bit, so your muscles can't move. And so now when I smile, you don't smile back because your brain you can't move your thing. So actually you don't get the ping for your brain. This person is smiling at me, they must be happy, I must be happy. And so when you give them a task like, identify these faces, what emotions are they? People with Botox or a constrained face with it, but like clay mask on them, do so much worse at this. It's like, it's amazing how
these poor, sad Botox people.
It's really shocking, actually, just because you can't move your face, you can't empathize as much. But
Just to explain that, so the people that actually had Botox done, they couldn't understand other people's emotions as well? Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, because they can't move their face, because your face needs to move to ping your brain to tell you that I must be happy, they must be happy. Like,
Wow.
it's like the mirror. Your face is the mirror. So, I mean, then they do other things. It's not just people who have Botox. So they try, like, people who've had another facial thing which puffs up their lips but doesn't paralyze, or the clay masks was another one, and even one where I think they put like glue or something in people's faces, which meant that you had to strain further to make it. So you did more motion in your face, and they actually got better at the task. Like, it's crazy. Like, I think
How did
for me,
those
it's
experiments get through the ethics committee?
honestly, like, glue on
It's not
people's
as
face.
bad as the Stanford prison experiment.
It's come a long way. But yeah, go on, we'll stick with smiling then, because I think it is, I've just found it's so valuable in this. But the only other one I suggest is actually just a morning walk. I've done this every day for the last few months, and like, so good. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's just underrated. Like, because once you've got this one habit, you can just keep stacking other ones. Like, when I get home, I will read a book. After I've read a book, but you need that first one. So like, I'll go for a morning walk. There we go.
Great. As a foundation for building other healthy habits. That's great. Until 2,000 years ago, human sacrifice was practiced by the Romans. We see this as something heinous now. What is something happening now that 2,000 years into the future, people will think is heinous?
You know, I had a little skim because you sent this question through last night. I actually don't have an answer for this, but I recognize that we change this so often. Like, the things that we found deplorable then, we're like, oh, that's disgusting. We're normalized now. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, you can go the opposite way with the question too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That is a really,
because there are plenty of things that people used to think was utterly abominable, which we totally do accept now. Yeah.
I mean,
that's also fine.
This is now my view with anything where you have a more, I don't know, these more social justice type issues where, like, people, you know, I don't know, for example, homosexuality, I think we broadly accepted as a culture, but there's still things like trans rights, which people have not quite accepted. And I just think, well, do you know what? In 20 years' time, are we going to have a different perspective? And are we going to be like, oh, Jesus Christ. So like, any issues, for example, rights for machines, right, is something that's come up. Like, at some point, they're going to get so smart that they essentially are like us. Should they have rights? And at this point, I can discount that completely. I'm like, no, it's a machine. But then I think, do you know what? Same way we used to talk about any other social issue, are we going to have the same view in 100 years' time? Potentially. And we would have now acclimatized to that view. So it's actually really difficult to say this. But I mean, one, just to top of head, it feels like toilet paper is a ridiculous thing. We're literally chopping down trees. Like, it feels ridiculous. I mean, maybe the other point to make is that so many behaviors are still going to be the same in 2,000 years. Yeah. And this is where behavioral science comes in. It's like blockchain, all of that stuff, being here for 5 minutes might be here for 5 minutes. But, you know, reciprocity, if I do something nice for you, you'll do something nice. Being here for 10,000 years, I'm confident it will still be here in 10,000 years. Same with your dopamine receptors. Like, a variable reward is going to be the same in 2,000 years. Yeah. That's the value, is like where I'm playing in a space of constants, pretty much, because we change at such a slow pace. So I didn't answer your question. I did 7 different anecdotes. I didn't notice.
It's all good. I guess 2,000 years from now, it will be illegal and heinous to execute a robot.
It honestly could be. Yeah, not just because of the investment that it took for that robot. It might be because we now value its intelligence at such a high level.
It will be inhumane not to treat it like a human.
Yeah, I mean, already we have a sanctity to this. You know, if it's a mum will say, "Don't shout at Alexa," it's like, that's really interesting. Like, it is just a robot, but we sort of recognize that it's wrong to treat things badly. Like, yeah, like if someone was abusing an animal, we like, no, don't do that. But like, sure, it's the same. Abusing Alexa.
That's the first flicker of humanity.
Yeah, and I think so. I think that feels like we're not there yet. But like, if you see the way things are going, probably.
Amazing, David. Thank you.
That's been fun.
Just to wrap up, if people want to get in contact with you, David, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, I think the best place you can always find me is Twitter. That's where I most spend a lot of my time. Big fan of Twitter. So you can find me at Utterly David on Twitter. I tweet about behavioral science, systems thinking, networks, and general tomfoolery of the day. So yeah, Utterly David on Twitter.